Welcome, my Whispering Bee family. This is the story of Mira, someone who never planned to leave. But when her best friend, Lila, took the job she had always dreamed of, without ever telling her she had even applied, staying suddenly felt impossible. So Mira bought a one-way train ticket to nowhere, carrying nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of rage. Stay with me to discover how life slowly reroutes Mira from chaos to peace. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about friendship, love, heartbreak, and growth. Mira bought the train ticket with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, not from fear, not from excitement, from rage so thick it felt like honey in her throat, sweet and suffocating all at once. She had rehearsed the moment 100 times in her head. The moment she would stand up, walk out, and never look back. But when it finally came, when she actually closed the apartment door behind her with that soft, final click, all she felt was emptiness. The kind that echoes. She didn't leave a note. What would it even say? That her best friend of 7 years had stolen her dream and smiled while doing it. That Lila had applied for the senior curator position at the Harlow Gallery without breathing a word of it. That Mira had found out at the staff meeting when the director announced Lila's name instead of hers, and Lila had looked across the table with those wide, apologetic eyes that said everything and nothing. No, there were no words for that kind of betrayal. So Mira chose silence instead. She packed a single suitcase, grabbed her laptop and sketchbook, and walked to the station before Dawn could change her mind. The train platform was nearly empty. A few commuters stood scattered like chess pieces, staring at their phones, lost in their own small worlds. Mira envied them. Their problems probably had solutions. Hers felt like a knot tied by someone who had thrown away the ends. She checked her ticket again. Seat 12, Car B, destination listed simply as Crescent Bay. She had chosen it because it was far, because she had never heard of it. Because when she typed random coastal towns into the search bar at 2 in the morning, this one had appeared with almost no information, no reviews, no promises. It was perfect. A place to disappear. The train lurched forward with a mechanical groan, and Mira watched the city shrink through the window. Buildings became toys, then dots, then nothing. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and tried not to think about the last conversation she'd had with Lila. It had been 3 days ago, before everything imploded. They had been drinking wine on Lila's balcony, legs tangled on the same worn blanket they'd shared since college. Lila had asked if Mira was nervous about the interview. Mira had laughed and said yes, of course, who wouldn't be? And Lila had squeezed her hand and said she would be amazing, that she deserved it more than anyone. That memory made Mira want to scream. The train cut through farmland and forests, hours melting together like wax. Mira didn't sleep. She stared at the passing world and let her mind go blank, a trick she had learned in therapy years ago when her mother died. Don't think, just breathe, just watch. Eventually the anger would pass, except this time it didn't pass. It sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and immovable, and she wondered if maybe some betrayals were too big to dissolve. Maybe this one would live inside her forever, a monument to the day she learned that love and loyalty were not the same thing. Crescent Bay announced itself with a hand-painted sign half hidden by overgrown ivy. The train slowed to a crawl, then stopped with a hiss at a platform that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1950s. Mira stepped off into the late afternoon light, and the first thing she noticed was the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of quiet, wind through tall grass, distant waves, the cry of gulls overhead. It wrapped around her like a blanket she didn't know she needed. The town itself was small enough to walk end to end in 20 minutes. A main street lined with faded storefronts, a diner with checkered curtains, a bookstore with a crooked awning, and a single grocery store that doubled as the post office. Mira found a rental listing tacked to a corkboard outside the library. A studio above a bait shop, month to month, no questions asked. She called the number. An older woman answered and said she could move in tomorrow if the deposit was cash. Mira said yes before she could second-guess herself. That first night, she stayed in a bed and breakfast that smelled like lavender and old wood. The owner, a woman named Patty with silver braids and kind eyes, didn't pry. She just handed Mira a key and pointed to the second floor. Mira climbed the stairs, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the quilted bed. She opened her phone. 43 missed calls. 67 text messages, all from Lila. She read the first one. "Myra, please, we need to talk." She didn't read the rest. She turned off her phone, shoved it into the bottom of her suitcase, and lay down in the dark. The next morning, she moved into the studio. It was small and drafty, with windows that overlooked the harbor and a kitchenette that consisted of a hot plate and a mini fridge. But it was hers. No shared walls with someone who had ripped her heart out. No reminders of inside jokes or movie marathons or 3 a.m. conversations about the future. Just 4 blank walls and the sound of the sea. Myra unpacked slowly, methodically, placing each item like she was building a new life from scratch. Clothes in the dresser, sketchbook on the desk, laptop plugged in but unopened. She wasn't ready to check her email, wasn't ready to see the inevitable message from the gallery, the polite rejection, the "we went in another direction." She knew it was there. She just didn't want to touch it yet. For the first week, Myra moved through Crescent Bay like a ghost. She walked the beach at dawn, bought coffee from the diner without making eye contact, and spent hours sitting on the rocks watching the tide come in and out. She didn't sketch, didn't paint, didn't do anything that reminded her of who she used to be. That version of Myra felt like someone she had left on the train, a shadow self that no longer fit. She wasn't sure who she was becoming, but she knew she couldn't go back. It was on the 8th day that she met Jonah. She had been sitting on the pier, legs dangling over the edge, staring at the water like it held answers. He appeared beside her without warning, a tall figure in a paint-splattered jacket, holding a canvas under one arm and a tackle box full of brushes in the other. He didn't ask if he could sit. He just did, setting his things down with the ease of someone who belonged everywhere. "You're new," he said. It wasn't a question. Myra glanced at him. He had dark curly hair that looked like it had never met a comb, sun-bronzed skin, and eyes that crinkled at the corners like he smiled more than he didn't. She didn't answer. He didn't seem to mind. He pulled out a brush and started mixing colors on a portable palette, humming something low and tuneless. After a few minutes, he spoke again. "I'm Jonah. I paint things. Badly, according to most people, but I like it anyway." Myra watched him work. His strokes were loose and confident, the kind that came from not caring about mistakes. "I'm Myra," she said finally. "I don't paint anymore." He looked at her, one eyebrow raised. "Anymore. So you used to?" She shrugged. "A long time ago." He nodded like that made perfect sense and went back to his canvas. They sat in silence for an hour, the only sound the slap of waves against the pier and the soft scrape of his brush. When he finally stood to leave, he said, "I'm here most afternoons, in case you get bored of staring at the ocean alone." She didn't go back the next day, or the day after that. But on the 3rd day, she found herself walking toward the pier again, telling herself it was just for the air, just for the view. Jonah was already there, same spot, same paint-stained jacket. He greeted her with a nod and slid a thermos across the wooden planks. "Tea. It's terrible, but it's hot." Myra took it, surprised by the gesture, and sat down beside him. They didn't talk much. He painted. She watched. And somehow that was enough. Over the following weeks, a rhythm developed. Myra would show up in the afternoons, and Jonah would be there, working on whatever piece had grabbed his attention that day. Sometimes it was the horizon. Sometimes it was the boats. Once it was just a seagull standing on a piling, which he rendered in exaggerated, almost cartoonish strokes that made Myra laugh for the first time since she'd arrived. He talked easily, the way some people breathed, filling the air with stories about the town, the fishermen. The woman who ran the bookstore and only sold novels with happy endings. Myra listened. She didn't share much, but Jonah never pushed. He just kept talking, kept painting, kept showing up. One afternoon, he brought a second canvas and set it beside her. "You don't have to use it," he said, "but it's here if you want." Myra stared at the blank surface, her chest tightening. "I told you, I don't paint anymore." He shrugged. "Okay, but the canvas doesn't care. It'll just sit here, being a canvas. No pressure." He went back to his work, and Myra sat there feeling the weight of the empty space in front of her. It felt like a challenge, like a door she wasn't sure she wanted to open. She didn't touch it that day, but the next time she came, she brought a pencil. Just to sketch, she told herself, just to see if her hands remembered. She started with the lighthouse in the distance, its white tower stark against the gray sky. The lines came slowly at first, hesitant and unsure. But then something shifted. Muscle memory took over. Her hand moved faster, more certain, and before she realized it, she had filled the page. Jonah glanced over and grinned. "Looks like someone does paint." Or draw, close enough. Myra felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not happiness, exactly, but not emptiness either. Something in between. As the days turned into weeks, Mira found herself thinking less about Lila and more about color, about light, about the way the water changed depending on the time of day, shifting from steel gray to deep blue to soft lavender. She started using the paints Jonah left for her, mixing shades and experimenting with strokes. Her work was rough at first, clumsy and unsure, but Jonah never critiqued. He just worked alongside her, offering the occasional comment about the way shadows fell or the best way to capture movement. It was the opposite of everything she had experienced at the gallery, where every piece was scrutinized, compared, judged. Here, on the pier, there was no competition, just creation. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Jonah asked the question Mira had been dreading. "So why did you really leave?" She kept her eyes on her canvas, her brush hovering mid-stroke. "I don't want to talk about it," he nodded. "Fair, but you know you can, right? If you ever do." Mira set down her brush and wrapped her arms around her knees. The words came before she could stop them. "My best friend took the job I wanted. She applied behind my back and got it. And I can't stop thinking about how much I want her to regret it. I want to prove I'm better. I want her to see what she lost." The admission hung in the air, raw and ugly. Jonah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's a heavy bag to carry into a new life." Mira looked at him, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. "What am I supposed to do? Just let it go. Pretend it didn't happen." He shook his head. "No, feel it, be mad, be hurt. But don't let it become the only thing you are. Revenge is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to get sick. You end up more damaged than they ever will." His words settled over her like a weight, uncomfortable and true. She wanted to argue, to defend her anger. But deep down, she knew he was right. The rage she had been clutching so tightly wasn't hurting Lila. It was only hurting her. That night, Mira lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, Jonah's words echoing in her mind. She thought about all the hours she had spent imagining scenarios where Lila failed, where the gallery realized their mistake, where Mira swooped in and proved her worth. But none of those fantasies made her feel better. They just made her feel hollow. She thought about her mother, who used to say that holding onto anger was like holding onto hot coals. You're the one who gets burned. Mira had always rolled her eyes at that advice. But now, lying in the dark, she understood. The next morning, she woke early and walked to the beach. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the sand. She found a flat rock and sat down, pulling her knees to her chest. She thought about Lila, not with anger this time, but with something closer to sadness. They had been friends for so long, shared so much. And somewhere along the way, something had broken. Maybe it was jealousy. Maybe it was ambition. Maybe it was just the natural end of a relationship that had run its course. Mira didn't know. But sitting there, watching the waves roll in and out, she realized something important. She didn't need Lila to regret anything. She didn't need to prove she was better. She just needed to let go. It wasn't a sudden revelation. It was gradual, like the tide. Over the following weeks, Mira found herself thinking about Lila less and less. The sharp edges of her anger began to soften. She stopped checking her phone for messages, stopped imagining confrontations that would never happen. She started focusing on the things that made her feel alive. Painting, walking, sitting with Jonah and talking about nothing and everything. She even started going to the bookstore, where the owner, a woman named Claire with bright red glasses, recommended novels that made her cry in the best way. One afternoon, Jonah invited her to his studio, a converted barn on the outskirts of town. It was chaotic and beautiful, filled with half-finished canvases, jars of brushes, and the smell of turpentine and coffee. He showed her his work, pieces that ranged from abstract swirls to hyper-realistic portraits. Mira was stunned by his talent. "Why do you paint on the pier when you can do this?" she asked. He shrugged. "Because the pier isn't about the painting. It's about the piece, the routine." The not being alone, she understood. That was why she kept going back too. As summer faded into fall, Mira began to feel something she hadn't felt in months. Contentment. Not the loud, explosive kind, but the quiet, steady kind. The kind that settled into her bones and made her mornings feel lighter. She painted almost every day now, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Her work had changed. It was softer, more fluid, less concerned with perfection. She painted the ocean in all its moods, the town in its sleepy stillness. Jonah once, though she didn't show him. She painted for herself, and that felt like freedom. One morning, she woke up and realized she hadn't thought about Lila in over a week. The recognition startled her. She sat up in bed, testing the feeling, waiting for the familiar surge of anger to return. But it didn't. Instead, she felt light, unburdened. She got up, made coffee, and stood by the window overlooking the harbor. The boats were already heading out, their engines a low hum in the distance. Gulls circled overhead. The sky was the color of pearls. And for the first time in months, Mira felt like herself again. Not the version of herself she had been before, but a new version. One that had been broken and put back together in a different shape. She thought about revenge, about all the energy she had poured into wanting Lila to fail. It felt distant now, like something that had happened to someone else. She didn't wish Lila harm. She didn't wish her success either. She just didn't wish her anything. And that, Mira realized, was the truest form of letting go. Not forgiveness, necessarily. Not reconciliation. Just indifference. The kind that came from building a life so full that the past no longer had room to live in it. That afternoon, she met Jonah on the pier as usual. He was working on a new piece, a seascape with wild, crashing waves. She set up her canvas beside him and started mixing colors. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that only came from months of showing up for each other. After a while, Jonah spoke. "You seem different." Lighter, Mira smiled. "I feel different." He nodded, not pressing for details. "Good. That's good." They painted until the sun began to set, the sky turning shades of pink and gold. And as Mira added the final touches to her canvas, she realized something profound. She had come to Crescent Bay to escape, but somewhere along the way, she had found something better. She had found herself. Winter arrived quietly, bringing with it cold winds and gray skis. The town slowed down even more, tourists vanishing, leaving only the locals. Mira liked it this way. The quiet felt intentional now, not empty. She had started selling some of her paintings at Claire's bookstore, small pieces that tourists had left behind but locals appreciated. She didn't make much money, but that wasn't the point. The point was that she was creating again, that her hands remembered what her heart had forgotten. Jonah became a constant in her life, not in a romantic way, but in something deeper. A friendship built on understanding rather than history. He knew she had been hurt. He didn't need to know the details. He just showed up, day after day, with his terrible tea and his easy laughter and his belief that the world was a place worth painting. Mira started to believe it too. She started to see beauty in the small things, the way frost gathered on the pier railings, the way the fishermen greeted each other every morning with the same jokes, the way Claire always had a new book recommendation, as if she could sense exactly what Mira needed to read. One evening, Jonah invited her to a bonfire on the beach. A group of locals gathered every month, he explained, just to talk, to share food, to remind each other they weren't alone. Mira hesitated. She wasn't good at groups, at small talk, at pretending to be okay when she wasn't, but Jonah gave her that look, the one that said she could trust him, so she went. The fire was warm and bright, crackling against the dark sky. People sat on logs and blankets, passing around thermoses of cider and telling stories. Mira sat quietly at first, listening, but then someone asked her about her paintings and she found herself talking. Not about the gallery, not about Lila, but about the ocean, about how it had taught her to move with the current instead of fighting it. The group listened, nodding, and Mira felt something shift inside her. She felt seen, not judged, just seen. As the night went on, she realized she had been so focused on what she had lost that she hadn't noticed what she had gained. A town that felt like home. Friends who didn't need her to be anything other than herself. A life that, while different from what she had planned, was still full, still worth living. She thought about the train ticket she had bought months ago, one way, no return. At the time, it had felt like giving up, like running away. But now, sitting by the fire with the sound of laughter and waves mixing together, it felt like the best decision she had ever made. Spring came slowly, the way it always did by the coast. The air warmed. Flowers bloomed in wild patches along the cliffs. The tourists started trickling back, and with them a sense of renewal. Mira had been in Crescent Bay for almost a year now. It felt surreal. A whole year of rebuilding, of healing, of learning that peace wasn't something you found. It was something you made, piece by piece, day by day. She had started teaching painting classes at the community center, just a few hours a week. It wasn't the senior curator position at the Harlow Gallery, but it was something, and that was enough. Jonah had started entering his work into local competitions. encouraged by Myra's gentle insistence that he was better than he thought. He had won a small award, nothing major, but it had given him a confidence she had never seen before. They celebrated with takeout on the pier, watching the sunset and talking about the future. Not in a concrete way, but in the way people did when they felt safe enough to dream again. Myra mentioned maybe opening a small gallery one day, something local. Something that celebrated artists who painted for the love of it, not the prestige. Jonah said he would be her first exhibitor. They laughed, but Myra tucked the idea away, a seed that might one day grow. One afternoon in late spring, Myra received an email. She almost didn't open it. She had gotten good at ignoring the outside world, but something made her click. It was from the Harlow Gallery, not from Lila, from the director. A polite message asking if Myra would be interested in a freelance consulting position helping to curate their summer exhibition. No obligations, no permanent ties, just an offer. Myra stared at the screen, her heart pounding. A year ago, this would have felt like vindication, like proof that she had been right all along. But now it just felt like an email. She thought about it for a day, then she replied, "Thank you, but I'm not interested. I found something better," and she meant it. That evening, she told Jonah about the email. He grinned. "So you turned down the thing you used to want, that's growth." Myra laughed. It felt strange, but also right. "I don't need them to validate me anymore, I validate myself." Jonah raised his thermos in a mock toast to self-validation and terrible tea. Myra clinked her cup against his, to new beginnings. They drank, and the ocean stretched out before them, vast and endless and full of possibility. Summer arrived in full force, bringing with it long days and warm nights. Myra's paintings had started attracting attention beyond the bookstore. A small gallery in the next town asked to feature her work. She said yes, not because she needed the recognition, but because she was proud of what she had created, proud of the journey it represented. The opening was small but meaningful. Jonah came. Claire came. Patty from the bed and breakfast came. They stood in the gallery, sipping cheap wine and admiring the pieces Myra had poured her heart into. And as she looked around at the faces of people who had become her family, Myra realized something profound. She had spent so long trying to prove herself to people who didn't matter. But the people who did matter had been here all along, believing in her, supporting her, loving her exactly as she was. That night after everyone had gone home, Myra walked back to the studio alone. The town was quiet, bathed in moonlight. She stopped on the pier, the place where everything had started to shift. She thought about the version of herself who had stepped off the train a year ago. Broken, angry, lost. And she thought about the version of herself standing here now, still imperfect, still healing, but whole in a way she had never been before. Revenge had dissolved, not because she had defeated Lila, but because she had chosen something better. She had chosen peace. She had chosen herself. The ocean whispered against the shore, a sound that had become as familiar as her own breathing. Myra closed her eyes and let the wind wash over her. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't need to. For the first time in her life, she was okay with not knowing, because the unknown wasn't scary anymore. It was wide. It was open. It was hers, and that was more than enough. Months passed, then a year, then more. Myra's life in Crescent Bay became the life she had always needed but never knew she wanted. She opened the small gallery she had dreamed about, a cozy space filled with work from local artists who painted because they loved it. Jonah was her partner in the endeavor, handling the business side while she curated. They made a good team. The gallery didn't make them rich, but it made them happy. And that, Myra had learned, was worth more than any prestigious position ever could be. She thought about Lila sometimes, not with anger, not with bitterness, just with a quiet acknowledgement that some people came into your life to teach you what you didn't want, what you wouldn't accept, what you deserved. Lila had taught her that loyalty was a choice, that ambition without integrity was hollow, that the people who truly loved you didn't compete with you. They celebrated you. And when they couldn't, they stepped aside with honesty instead of betrayal. Myra had learned those lessons the hard way. But she had learned them, and that made all the difference. One evening, as Myra locked up the gallery and prepared to head home, she noticed a familiar figure standing outside. Her heart stopped. It was Lila, older, tired-looking, but unmistakably her. They stared at each other for a long moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Lila spoke first. "I've been trying to find you for months." Myra didn't respond, she just waited. Lila took a breath. I need to apologize for what I did, for how I did it. I was wrong. And I've regretted it every day since. Myra felt the old anger flicker, a familiar ghost. But it didn't take hold. Instead, she felt something closer to pity. She could see the truth in Lila's eyes, the guilt, the regret. And she realized that Lila had been carrying this weight the whole time. That maybe, in her own way, Lila had suffered too. Myra nodded slowly. Okay. Lila blinked, surprised. That's it, okay. Myra shrugged. What do you want me to say? That I forgive you? I don't know if I do, but I don't hate you either. I've moved on, and I think you should too. Lila's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Myra. I'm so sorry. Myra felt a pang of something, not quite sympathy, not quite closure, but something in between. I know, she said softly, and I hope you find what you're looking for. But it's not here. It's not with me. Lila nodded, wiping her eyes. She hesitated, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the evening light. Myra stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. She had imagined this confrontation 1,000 times. In her fantasies, she had been cold, cutting, victorious, but in reality she just felt tired and relieved, because she realized that she didn't need Lila's apology to move on. She had already moved on. The apology was for Lila, not for her, and that was okay. She locked the gallery door and started walking home, the ocean breeze cool against her skin. She thought about the train ticket she had bought so long ago. One way, no return. At the time, it had felt like an ending, but now she understood. It had been a beginning. The beginning of the life she was always meant to live. Back at the studio, Jonah was waiting with takeout and that grin she had come to love. Rough day, he asked. Myra shook her head. No, just an interesting one. She told him about Lila, about the apology, about how it hadn't changed anything because there was nothing left to change. Jonah listened, nodding. How do you feel? Myra thought about it. Free, she said finally. I feel free. Jonah smiled. Good, that's what you deserve. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that came from knowing each other's rhythms. And as Myra sat there, surrounded by the life she had built from the ruins of her old one, she felt a peace so deep it brought tears to her eyes. Not sad tears, grateful tears, because she had learned the hardest lesson of all. That revenge was a poison, but peace was a choice, and she had chosen well. Years later, when people asked Myra about her life, about how she ended up in Crescent Bay, she would smile and say it was an accident. A one-way train ticket bought in anger. A town chosen at random. A life built on the ruins of betrayal. But it wasn't an accident. It was grace. The kind that comes when you stop fighting and start flowing. When you let go of what was and embrace what is. When you realize that the life you thought you wanted was just a stepping stone to the life you were always meant to have. Myra had found her place, not by searching for it, but by allowing it to find her, and that made all the difference. The ocean still whispered at night. The pier still creaked under her feet. Jonah still showed up with terrible tea and easy laughter, and Myra still painted, not for validation, not for revenge, but because it made her feel alive, because it reminded her that she had survived, that she had chosen peace over bitterness, that she had built a life worth living. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all, not proving she was better, but knowing she was enough, exactly as she was, in this small town. With these quiet people, living this beautiful, imperfect, wide-open life, and she wouldn't change a single thing. Whisper of the Ocean had taught her well. That healing wasn't loud, it was soft, it was patient. It was the gentle accumulation of days where you chose yourself over your pain, where you let go of the need to win and embrace the peace of simply being. Myra had left everything behind, her job, her best friend, her plans, but in return she had found something infinitely more valuable. She had found herself, and in the end, that was the only thing that mattered, the only thing worth fighting for. The only thing worth keeping. Herself, whole, healed, free, and finally truly at peace.